This is Ezekiel Drews, host of Podcast, A Star Wars Story. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Hey, it's Baxter Colburn here from Public House Media. Did you know that we just added a store here at Public House Media? No, I'm not talking about a grocery store where you can go buy apples or bananas or peanut butter, which are all fantastic, especially when peanut butter's on all of those. Anyway, we've added a store here at Public House Media so you can not only come and represent your favorite podcast network, but also represent your favorite shows as well, too. Just go over to thephmedia.com and look in the top right corner where you'll see the button that says Store. Click on that and you can search through all of our great products. Or if you go to our Facebook page, Public House Media, you can see on the left-hand side a tab that says Store. All of our products are listed there as well too. It's the new Public House Media Store. You don't want to miss it. It is fantastic. Buy some of that great swag to support your favorite shows and to support Public House Media. Check it out today.
This is Rachel Mullins, host of Hashtag No Filter Friday, here on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you're done with this episode, I hope you'll come check out my new show, Hashtag No Filter Friday, where we talk about all of the sexual misconduct allegations swirling around Hollywood. A new show drops every Friday at 8:30 Pacific Standard Time. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you'll never miss an episode of Hashtag No Filter Friday. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Hey everyone, welcome to Beauties and Headcanons, where we're nerdy, and you probably are too. This is Lindsay, and I'm here today with Elizabeth and Emily, and we're here to talk nerdy to you. Today, we wanted to talk about how Disney's been doing a lot of live-action remakes on their classic animated favorites. And specifically, we did our homework, and we wanted to talk about the remake of Beauty and the Beast. The original animated film that we all grew up with was released in 1991. I was a whopping 6 years old. It grossed $425 million at the box office and scored very well with critics and audiences alike. And I don't know if you guys remember, but the animated actually took a different turn with the quality of it. It had a little bit of a different look in 1991. It won the Academy Award for Best Original Song for Beauty and the Beast, Golden Globes for Best Motion Picture, Musical or Comedy, Best Original Score, Motion Picture and Best Original Song, Motion Picture again for Beauty and the Beast. The remake was just released last year in 2017, and it received a similar reception. It grossed $1.264 billion. Though falling a little shorter with critics than its original, it received criticism specifically with its making the character LeFou gay. Well, yeah, and also with the general criticism that Belle kind of suffers from Stockholm Syndrome. We actually know that Emma Watson herself studied the relationship between Belle and Adam, although we don't actually ever hear that that's his name in the remake. We do know that from the original. Thanks, Elizabeth. And she concluded that it was not the case before she ever agreed to sign on, because she actually stated Stockholm Syndrome is where a prisoner will take on the characteristics of and fall in love with their captor. Belle actively argues and disagrees with Beast constantly. We believe this happens both in the live action and the animated. And Emma Watson had said that none of the characteristics of someone with Stockholm Syndrome were portrayed with Belle, because she keeps her independence, she keeps her freedom of thought, she's still a very independent young woman character, and she's actually kind of defiant, both before forming a friendship with Beast and then an eventual romance. So we did do our homework, like I said. We have all three of us have seen the live action now and the animated version, and we're just going to kind of tell you what we thought of it.
I'm going to hop in and say I loved the original. My sisters and I grew up watching that together. So it just brings back so many memories from the music and watching the original movie with my sisters. The remake used most of all the same songs that I already know and love. And they added a couple new songs in as well, which was interesting to hear, because I actually really enjoyed a lot of the music and the melodies and just the songs in general that they added too. The new songs that were introduced added to the story, I think. So it actually was really well done musically. However, I'm not a huge fan of the auto-tuning that was done on some of the voices. Not all of them were auto-tuned, but if it was auto-tuned, you can really tell. And that makes me kind of sad, because if somebody is chosen to play a role, not going to name huge names, but if someone's chosen to play a role, I really believe that they should be able to play the whole role, acting and singing the part. So that's a personal opinion there, and I miss the original Belle's voice. So I'm going to leave it at that as far as voicing goes. And I really also loved how they animated the characters in the castle in the new one, with like Lumiere and Plumet and everybody. It just looked so great. Everything in the set and in the castle and in the village, everywhere, just they did a fantastic job with creating an atmosphere wherever they were. The castle just felt really lavish and ornate and beautiful, and 1800s France, it just felt French, and in the village, everything felt like you were in a small village in this tiny town, so they did a really great job with the set and making everything look and feel as if you were there, I feel. And so that was really, really impressive, I thought. I also really enjoyed the colorfulness of the costuming and the attention to detail of the period dress and the hair and the makeup. I think all of that was just really, really well done, because it was accurate to the time period. And, it's one of those like goofy time periods where we, everybody wore makeup if you were well-to-do. And so, man, woman, you wore wigs, you wore heels, you wore fancy clothes, and you wore makeup. And so that was really well done. It just helps us feel like we're in that time period still. Now, something that I'm a little hesitant to mention, because I know I'm not 100% sure about this, was the racial diversity that there was in the casting. I'm not 100% sure about how diverse France would have been in this time period. So, and I mean, if anybody has factual details on that, I'd love to hear it, because I was really surprised that the bookstore owner was a black man, and I don't know if that could have been accurate or not, but I was surprised. And so I feel one of the things I really find important in movies is historical accuracy. And so if that is accurate, awesome. That's great. I would love to have that kind of representation. But if it's not accurate, then I don't feel that it's appropriate to have casting like that. So I don't know if it is accurate or not, but if it is, awesome. If it's not, then maybe we should have gone a different route. That's personally what I would have done. And I also, moving on to my next point then, I really, really appreciated how in this movie, as opposed to the animated one, the Beast could read, as far as I could tell. It makes a lot more sense because he was raised in a very wealthy family, so why wouldn't he have an excellent education? They had the means for it. And there was a portion where the Beast was waking up and Belle was reading or quoting Shakespeare to him, and so he finishes the Shakespeare quote and she says, "Oh, you know Shakespeare too?" And he said, "I had an expensive education." That makes so much sense. It really does. So I always thought that was weird that a prince didn't know how to read when I watched the original animated version. And so I think that's a good thing that he actually says that he did have an education and that he actually, he's read some of those books, and he said some of those are in Greek though. So I'm like, oh, well, that makes sense because that time period, so a lot of people actually knew Greek and Latin too, but maybe he just didn't quite remember a lot of it because Greek is hard, guys. It is. My husband knows a little Greek and it's hard. So anyways, I think that the fact that the Beast being able to read actually allows for him and Belle to have a stronger bond over those books, though, because then they can talk about the ones that they've read and introduce new books to each other that, the other one hasn't read. So I think that's kind of a cool change in the dynamic, rather than Belle teaching the Beast how to read as a bonding experience, which is a bonding experience too. They can kind of compare notes and say like, "Hey, this book was really interesting. Did you read it?" Like people do, still today. So that's kind of all my thoughts.
For me, going into this, I just wanted to state for the record, I, as a rule, don't really approve of remakes for the most part, or reboots, or reimaginings, or, whatever term Hollywood wants to gloss it over with. I don't normally approve of them. I really wish they would focus more on making more unique and original art instead of just rehashing what's already been done before. I think they kind of try to play a little too much into, what people remember and their familiarity with it, and maybe their love of the original work, and try to parlay that into more monetary success for them, even if they don't carry it off as well. And I think that's just, as a creative person myself, I think that's really dishonest to do with art. But I mean, there are always exceptions to the rule. It's never hard and fast. Also just the leap of making something that was animated into something live action is a real challenge, because there's a certain freedom that's afforded by animation that doesn't really carry over. I think fans of Avatar: The Last Airbender will really agree with me here, that a lot of things did not carry over well from the original animated series to the awful abomination of a live-action film that we do not talk about or acknowledge. But I would have to say overall that this particular movie really pulls it off. And one of my first points is actually in response to one of the things that Emily had said, in that she wasn't sure how racially diverse 1800s France would be, and that is, one of the things I really loved about this is the inclusion of people of color. There is this vision I think most people have that black people just didn't exist in Europe around that time, that they just, I don't know, all of a sudden sprung up in about the mid-20th century or something. But that is just, it's patently false. It is absolutely not true. If you look around into a lot of the art that was produced around that time, there is a lot of depiction of black people. They're not seen or depicted as visitors or foreigners or anything like that. They're depicted as integrated into the society, as just a normal part of everyday life. So, I love that they actually included people of color in the film, because all the films and all the media that exclude them just continue to reinforce this whitewashed narrative that is just absolutely untrue. So total props to them for, including them with that. And to go along with that, I really agree with Emily on the costuming, because it was just absolutely beautiful. It's set to the time, it's accurate, and I really love that they didn't cling too tightly to the original designs of the animated film. I think if they had, it would have been too much of a temptation to follow it a little too closely. I like that they basically used them as inspiration, but made an effort to make it more historically accurate. So if they had clung too tightly to it, I think it would have just looked a little bit too hokey and corny. But this way it just, it looks like a period film, and it lets the magic itself stand out from that. So it's, the magic is different, and it looks more wonderful next to this realistic setting. I really loved that the original animated film was more like just Belle's story, but this, it felt more like Belle's story and Adam's story. Both of them together, their own personal journeys and coming together with each other. As a writer, I really appreciate that they fleshed out a lot of the secondary characters like LeFou, characters like Plumette, and, a lot of the staff around the castle, and they even gave Adam a backstory. They gave him more character. They discussed his mom and his dad and where he came from and how he came to be who he was. In the animated film, it was more like, oh, he's just, he's just an arrogant brat. And he's just an arrogant brat because that's just who he is. There's no real explanation for why he is the way he is. But in the film, it's explained that, oh, his mother was very kind and very loving, but she died, and, then his father took over, and he was, just this boorish man who treated him harshly and, shaped him into who he wanted him to be, which was basically like a mirror of himself. And so that's why he is the way he is. And I really like that explanation of that. And I also love that they included more about Belle's mom. In the animated, as in with a lot of Disney movies, the mother, or sometimes both of the parents in some movies, are just completely absent. And their absence isn't really explained, and it's also not really seen to have much of an impact on the characters who knew them. Whereas in this case, it seemed like Belle's mom really had an impact on her husband. She left an impact on Belle, even though Belle doesn't really know her that well. And I really like that they explained, why she died, that she died in the plague, and that the reason that, Belle and her father live in that village is because they fled Paris during the plague so that Belle wouldn't catch it. It's just one of those little things that as a writer I really appreciate. It makes the whole world feel like it's complete. We're not just looking at a set, we're actually looking at a whole complete world. And that's one of the things I always strive to make in my own stories. So it's really great to actually see that, in an actual movie, because we don't always get that. The library, absolutely one of my most favorite things in the film, both the animated and the live action film, is the library. Beauty and the Beast was always one of my favorite movies, and growing up, and one of the reasons is because she had this wonderful library to go to and read. I've always been a bookworm, so that was kind of my reasoning for liking her so much, is because she had this huge, extensive library that she could just go to and read for hours and just get lost in. And, the movie did such a great job at portraying this absolutely expansive room, just lined with books from top to bottom. It was everything that I would ever dream of as a bookworm. Let's see, I love the little comedic touches. It really kind of goes well with it, I think. They don't go too overboard with it, but it's just enough to add to it, especially with, the back and forth between Lumiere and Cogsworth. And then a little bit about Mrs. Potts being insulted because she's referred to as Chip's grandmother. I love that because it's kind of an obvious throwback to the fact that in the animated film, she's presented as, this elderly woman with white hair, and yet she's supposed to be Chip's mom somehow. I know there's been all sorts of discussion on how and why this is the case, but I like that in the live action film, they actually present her as, she's a younger woman. She's, not super young, but, she's reasonably the age that a woman would be to have a son of that age. So I really like that they kind of included that throwback. And I will say one of the things that made me really nervous for this was the music, because I'm really not a huge musical fan. I know that's, probably sacrilegious to some people, but I'm really not. Unless it's animated, I think a lot of live action musicals just kind of fall flat, at least for me, because it just kind of comes off as fake. Like, why are all these people just all of a sudden dancing and singing together? It doesn't feel natural to me, so I don't really like it that much. But the director for this was absolutely perfect. His name is Bill Condon, and he has written and directed such musical movies as Chicago and Dreamgirls. And his experience really shows, because the way everything is set up, the way everything is coordinated, it's absolutely magnificent. And it really plays into it well. The fact that, this is a film and this is a story, but this is also a musical story. It has this beautiful music that goes along with it, and it's incorporated well into it without making it kind of stand out and look kind of fake, like I think a lot of live action musicals do, at least for me. So overall, I think it was really, really well done. Like I said before, the realistic setting is very well done, and it really gives the magic a chance to stand out and really make the film what it is. It's one of the very, very few remakes I think I wholeheartedly approve of, just across the board.
Thank you so much for Elizabeth for clarifying the diversity issue, because I really wasn't sure. And thinking back, that makes a ton of sense that there would be some racial diversity in the 1800s in France. Just thinking about American history, there were African Americans or Africans in America in the 1700s. So, it does make sense because people had traveled at that point in time to different regions of the world. So, understanding that and, referencing pieces of art and things like that, that makes so much sense. So thank you for clarifying that. It helps me a little bit more, feel more comfortable with the choices that they made, casting that. It just looked really weird to see a black dude in a white wig. You're not used to seeing that because, we're so accustomed to seeing, like you said, the whitewashed historical Europe thing. And it's, like you said, it's not entirely accurate. So it's really good that they're portraying it more accurately, as they should.
Yeah, and I mean, I think I hope this is the case for, other period movies from here on out, that they accurately depict, not only black people, but also women in situations. Because, the thing is I think there were studies and things done that, realistically, women are half the population. So, they should be about 50-50 when portraying, men and women, no matter what the time period, right? Well, studies have found that if there is close to that number, 50-50 in a crowd in a commercial or a movie or anything like that, people actually say, oh, there's too many women there. I don't think that's accurate.
That's weird.
Yeah, so even though we are half of the population, it's seen as weird to see a lot of women. And so I hope that they continue that, because people of color and women were always present, no matter what the case, whether it's battles. Women actually ran the battlefields back then. There were nurses before they were ever conscripted into the army. They, helped the soldiers with food. They, washed clothes. They did all of these things. Yes, even in battlefields. Yes, even in the government. I think a lot of people don't realize that, say, mistresses of kings and nobles, they were actually very important people. One of the most influential of them was Madame de Pompadour. And she was a French mistress of one of the kings. And she had a lot of influence in the court. So they were actually, very influential people, and they aren't really portrayed that way. At least, most of the time in films, they aren't portrayed that way. And so I hope that continues down the line for Hollywood, because I think that's really, really important. I mean, I think we saw with Black Panther that, this is really great to portray this representation. It's really important to portray this representation. And so I hope that in the future they keep that in mind, and for both women and people of color, that, representation is important. And just because you're accurate, it doesn't mean that they aren't present. It just means that, we need to actually be better educated on our own histories.
Yeah, exactly. And that makes so much sense. The better educated we are on the historical accuracy, the more common it would actually become to see what's accurate out there.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, that's one of the number one things to, combat this whitewashing of history, is to actually just, learn about it. Because, if people don't know, they don't know, Exactly. So, I mean, I know it's just a seemingly small part of the movie, but I think, to me personally, that was one of the biggest things, was actually seeing people portrayed accurately as they were at that time in history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is really awesome.
All right, so I don't have quite as much to add as the ladies did. I do feel like life should have more musical interjections. So, Elizabeth, you saying that, you feel like it's not very natural. Well, sure, it's not. But, I mean, if I had my way, I'd probably be dancing all the time. And I would definitely need some auto-tuning as well, just like some people might have needed in the live-action version of this movie. So I feel like if I could do some auto-tuning and some dancing, everything would be a little bit nicer. I do remember a quote about how the trouble with reality is that there is no background music. So, every movie that has a little bit of background music makes me feel just a little bit more connected to them, the music that plays in my head, I suppose. I am a person who just loves all Disney movies, so I will say that I loved the animated, I loved the live action, and everything that you ladies said about the music and the accuracy of the costumes and the sets were just amazing to me. I absolutely love the way that France was portrayed, and the architecture, the library, and everything that there was as well. So I was really happy with seeing this one, and I'm excited for everything else too, but I do feel like that creativity factor needs to really be amped up with our generation, with the generations we have yet to come, because there's so much potential for more new things, and it just seems like we rehash what's going on all the time. But if Disney wants to keep on doing Disney and do Disney again, I have no problem with that.
Thanks for getting nerdy with us today. So why don't you guys talk nerdy to us? What are your thoughts on Disney's Beauty and the Beast movies, or remakes in general? You can find Beauties and Headcanons on Facebook, Twitter, and Tumblr to share your nerdy topic suggestions. Subscribe to this podcast and others from Public House Media on iTunes, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, and wherever good podcasts are found.
We also love feedback, so if you liked this episode, or even if you didn't, please give us a rating and a review so that we can keep making great episodes for you. I'm Emily.
I'm Elizabeth.
I'm Lindsay.
And thanks for getting nerdy with us on Beauties and Headcanons.